You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Sure. Now, Roberto, I thought to start, let's talk about this extraordinary story because, as I said, it resembles that of a James Bond sort of movie, really, dealing with MI6.
Well, it is.
Secret Service and codes and
All sorts of
identity
stuff.
changes and dealing with criminals and all that stuff. It was an incredible story when I did the research on it before our chat today. I was like, wow, this is like something you'll see in the movies or something, I was watching
should be a TV series, shouldn't it?
I was watching a movie that Chuck Norris did, Delta Force Number 2, and he was fighting Colombian drug dealers.
Yeah.
It's a great movie.
Chuck Norris, yeah.
Probably that's not what happened in real life, but anyway, that's
Hollywood. No, it's Hollywood Hollywoodizes everything.
Yeah,
which means effectively they over dramatize stuff to make it more audience friendly because there's a commercial side to what Hollywood do. But my life, my book is most definitely a TV series. It's got to be. My childhood is different to my adulthood. There's this kind of two separations, and in between there's this area where there's this sort of child learning about what's going on in this other country called England, where he has an adopted English family. And so this child, which is obviously me, I look back on, and it's quite a weird experience. And one of the weirdest experiences this child has is learning some of these incredible sports that they play in this country, 9,000 miles away or whatever it is from my home country. And so incredible experiences, which of course I touch on in the book because I've got to talk about those things because they're very emotional and interesting parts of my life. But you're right, I have this kind of shadow behind me of this sort of, Secret Service type violent childhood that I experienced. So it's all a very strange mix, but it would make for incredible viewing for sure.
Yes, well, if you decide to ever do a movie about it or something, it will definitely get a lot of people watching. But you wrote a book about it.
I think it'd be I think it'd be great. I mean, my life is a kind of prequel to the Narcos series in a way because it's about my childhood. This little boy grows up as an adopted child of an MI6 secret agent who's out there doing all sorts of stuff, and he's infiltrating the drugs business, trying to, whatever. That's very complicated. We could go on for that for an hour, but effectively, this child gets sort of dragged into all this, and my story is about growing up, seeing that part of my life as a child rather than an adult. So when I write the book, so here's my book. When I wrote this book, Firstborn, it's really about the beginning. The first parts of the book are about this child's experiences, and of course they're horrific. Shooting, brains being blown out, all sorts of stuff. Because it turns out that my biological father, Pablo Escobar, has discovered he had his son. He's trying to kidnap me back, but the MI6 people. It's an incredible story, which of course it's in my book. But it does. You're right. It needs more. It needs to be. It needs to have the story needs to be told on the big screen for sure.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully you can pitch the idea to Hollywood or something, Steven Spielberg or something like that.
Well, I don't know. I'll leave that to the people who know what they're doing.
You just stick to what you know best, Roberto.
I'm an artist, I love life. I paint. This is one of my paintings. I'm in my studio, and for therapy, I play the drums. I'm out there with Status Quo at Wembley sometimes in my head. And I paint. I paint and write books. I do my best because the thing with my first book, Firstborn, is it sparked something in me to tell stories about other things, like the drugs trade or whatever. And so I've written several other books as well. So I'm enjoying writing books. I wouldn't say I'm the greatest author in the world, but I try. And the management of the English language allows you to do that, which thankfully I learned at school in the UK, which is pretty cool.
Yes, definitely. What was that life like? Your adopted father. Let's talk about that, MI6 and secret agents and that. Was it like James Bond? Fancy suits, cars,
Well,
drinking
he
martini?
well, he drank whiskey, but he was a real life James Bond. He was a Secret Service agent, you know, with all the trimmings and trappings that go with it. And there was I mean, you talk about James Bond, but it's quite interesting because my adopted father was Pat Whitcomb, and he was 6'4", so he stood out like a sore thumb back there in the 60s in Colombia, where everyone was like 4'8". and and he did. He wore Savile Row suits, and he had brogues, and you know, he whatever. And he was a very Englishman abroad, and he was very quiet. They called him the quiet bastard in Spanish. The people who he worked with. But yeah, he was sent out to Colombia in 1959 by a guy called Sir Arthur Norman, who was chairman of De La Rue, which is a security firm in the UK. And it turns out that Sir Arthur Norman was an MI6 agent, as well as being chairman of Thomas de la Rue. And it turns out that Arthur Norman and another gentleman fought in the war together and knew each other very well. And the other gentleman was a chap called Ian Fleming. And it's quite interesting, the relationship there. And Sir Arthur Norman's office, which is very much like the office where Moneypenny is and all the rest of it. But, you know, I experienced all this as a child. And when the first Bond movies came out, I could see the relationship between that office in Regent Street and Moneypenny, who in fact, there was a real PA outside his office called Lady Anne Bullen, who worked for the Foreign Office as well. So there are a lot of very similar connections with the Bond story, which is mythical, but it's based on the real life stuff. And of course, back then, the Secret Service they weren't part of the British government as such. They weren't MI6. They were the Secret Service, which started all the way back, you know, in the days of Elizabeth I. And they had to raise their own funds. You know, they weren't funded by the government. So they were always operating on a sideline with business abroad and empire building and infiltrating countries and causing trouble or whatever it was. And so he was out there in Colombia doing this mission or whatever. And which is I detailed it a lot in my book because it's quite important. They're still there today, you know, Thomas de la Rue, but it's all changed hands and so on. But the story is connected. So, I mean, just briefly, in 1963, they launched the armored car business, and they're transporting money for the Colombian banking system. They're also printing all the money for the Bank of Bogota. So they've got the country by the neck, which is what they want to do, the Secret Service. He who controls the money controls the country. So they've got that sorted. They're transporting money, and one of the armored cars gets blown up on a railway line, and the chaps get killed, and the money gets stolen by a gang. And they can't have that because the banks are not going to trust the company if they keep getting robbed. So they come up with this concept, and they raid this house, and it's all blood and guts everywhere. But at the end of the day, they find a little boy in the back room. He's a baby boy. In 1965, this raid took place, and the boy's, 3-4 months old or whatever. And the MI6 agent walks in, and the dust is cleared. They've got the money. The helicopters are hovering out there outside waiting for him. And he sees this girl, and she's dying, and she dies in his hands. But before she dies, she tells him to look after her son, Roberto, and that's me. Now, I can't remember that as an individual, but my adopted father told me this later, many years later, before he died. And it was a very emotional connect we had. So that on its own, having as a child witnessed my mother's brutal death, I don't remember it physically in my head, but it must be in there because everything we see and hear stays in our brains. So that's been with me all my life, and therapy is to deal with it up front, write about it, get it out there, and then you can deal with it in a public sort of way, and then it's easier for me to deal with.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine that.
No,
very traumatic.
It's yeah. I mean, that's just the start of all the trauma. That's just the beginning. I mean, my whole childhood was trauma from start to finish.
Yes, I suppose we all go
through
difficulties, and
Or,
our life.
I look back now and I think, well, terrible. And I feel very sorry for that child. Dreadful things. But there are millions of children suffering dreadful things every day. So I'm not unique in any way, and I shouldn't be counted as being unique in that sense. So
Yeah.
there are millions and millions of children suffering horrific trauma today.
Yeah.
So we just have to accept that humankind is not necessarily very good to its children.
No, it can be very brutal.
Sadly.
But I suppose it sums up the character of your adopted father: humility, empathy, caring, compassionate.
He was very
How
old school.
important was he
Very old school.
in your life from
Well,
that
you know,
connection and bond that you struck?
yeah, I knew that I felt, you know, when you're a child, you feel stuff. I felt that he loved me in a way. You know, I felt this connection. He spent time with me. You know, he used to come home from wherever the hell he was, and he used to get in, and I had a playroom of my own, and we used to be playing with my Lego, and he used to come in and see me and, you know, get down there with me on the floor and play with me. And I remember things like that. You know, obviously he wasn't a perfect person, but I feel emotionally positive towards him. Whereas the man we used to go and see in Medellin, who said he was my father, I feel very negative towards, and I've always felt frightened of him because I never understood what was going on. Which obviously later as an adult I understand, but as a child, you know, this man was very scary. I was scared of this man. I had to sit on his lap, and I had to sit next to him, and I've got pictures of me sat on his knee, and I was really frightened. I didn't like that man at all. But there's a massive contrast between it's almost schizophrenic. There's contrast between my adopted father, who wasn't biologically connected to me in any way, is someone I felt love for, and my biological father, who was connected to me genetically, who I have never, ever felt any love for at all. In fact, I've despised what he did to the world. So there's a very interesting contrast and connection.
Yeah. Obviously, when your adopted father told you the truth and said, "Son, here's the truth. Your real father's Pablo Escobar." Did you have an inkling up until that moment when he told you? Did you know deep down that this man was related to me in some way?
Well, okay, so now we're shooting right forward to 1989, and I'm working on the Costa del Sol, designing golf courses with Peter Alice. We're near Gibraltar designing a golf course, which is there today. I'm doing all the drawings and stuff. And my adopted father is still on some mission. He's obviously still working on it, but he's got an office in Madrid now. And he phones me up. I'm on the Costa del Sol, and he says to me, "Son, we need to talk." And this turns into a long relationship and conversation, which is about 4 years, where he's, you know, it's not an instant thing. But you've got to remember, we didn't have the internet. We relied on our news from the newspapers, our memories, our newspapers, and the TV news. The Costa del Sol, well, we were out it was gold rush time. We were out in the middle of it. Basically, you know, there was we weren't connected to the world the way you and I are connected now. You're in Australia and I'm here in Mallorca. There's no that connection like that. Now we Google everything and we know everything, right? But we didn't know anything back then. So all I had was my memories. And so when my adopted father calls me up to Madrid, 89, now I look back, I go, wow, yeah. Because 89 was when he went to prison, my biological father. It was a sort of weird prison called the Cathedral, which he sort of managed. But point is, he wasn't running his business anymore, and he was losing control of his business. Now, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything about this. I'm just like, I've got a wife, some kids, and I'm working on the Costa del Sol. So he then calls me up to Madrid, and we start having. I remember we went to see Full Metal Jacket, the Vietnam War movie, together, and we had popcorn and chocolates and stuff. And then we went back to the apartment in Madrid, number 6 in Calle Goya Street, and he started talking to me about his life. And I could tell he wanted to, because I'm like a grown up now. I'm 24, and he started telling me about his life, and I'm thinking he wants to get something out of me. And he says, "You remember that man? We used to go and see him in Medellin, you know, the one, and we used to go and by helicopter to this farm in the forest. and he used to come and see you there. And that man, well, that man is your. You remember I told you before you went to prep school that you were adopted and you didn't know what I was talking about? Yes, yeah. I said, well, now you know what adopted means. I'm your adopted father, as you know. So your biological father is that man, and his name is Pablo Escobar. I said, I just like shrugged my shoulders. So what? And he gave me some paperwork, which is a baptism certificate and a birth certificate and an adoption certificate. And all there had my mother's name on, Maria Lucia Sendoya, and my father's name, Pablo Escobar, and paperwork and stamps and births, all the usual stuff that we all have. And I just sort of went, okay, what does this mean? Because I'm a grown up, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. It's history. And then he says, well, there is a problem. Your biological father was a massive, massive criminal, drug lord, and all the rest of it. He went into all that, and I thought, oh, I'm not a good guy then. Yeah, I can wonder why he had all these guns around him. You know, you start thinking about your childhood. And he said, do you remember the shootouts with your bodyguards? That was him trying to get you back. We were protecting you. And that's why we sent you to school in England and all the rest of it. And he went through all this. And then he said to me, well, now he doesn't have control of his business. Your security is an issue. And when you get home tomorrow, there will be special forces bodyguards at your house in Grande. I thought, oh, shit, that's not good. Don't tell my wife anything. So I haven't got a mobile. I can't just send her a WhatsApp. You know, I picked up the phone and phoned her. She was at home and told her that it would be body. She said, they're already here. I thought, oh, okay. I said, well, I'll explain anything when I get home. So this started this conversation that sort of started coming out about money and what he was doing and everything else. But it turns out that, you know, now I'm not protected by the Escobar name, or if you like, that I hadn't realized I was, but now I'm not protected. I need security again because I had bodyguards all my childhood, so I was quite used to it. So I'm living on the Costa del Sol now in 1989, and I've got personal bodyguards again. And my wife's children and my children are escorted to school by a chauffeur and a security officer. You know, it's like really surreal. Suddenly it all goes back to Colombia again. And, well, that was the start. I don't know if that answers your question. I try to be as brief as possible, but it's a really difficult time to remember.
Who your real
so
father
it wasn't
was.
Yeah, so it wasn't the big drama in the sense that, oh shit, Pablo Escobar. I mean, you know, the world didn't, only Colombia and the Secret Service and the security floor, they're the only people that really knew who he was. He was famous in Colombia, but I hadn't lived in Colombia for years, so there was this disconnect. I didn't really know who he was.
Yeah, definitely. And then your father puts another bombshell on you, and he reveals when he was dying, he was ill, and he gives you this secret code, which you talk about in the book.
Well,
about the hiding place of the money that they got from the operations that they did. Tell us about that, realizing that.
Well, so the conversation, as I said, drags on. He tells me lots of stuff. It's not all overnight. It's time and time we meet and talk and all the rest of it. And then later on in Walton-on-Thames in Surrey, I could tell he was getting something wrong with his hand. He had a withered hand. I thought, this is weird. And, you know, he wasn't well. His spine was beginning to, and it turns out he had motor neurone disease. My adopted father, this is, and effectively, you know, that's what killed him. So the story that of his life culminate. I mean, it's a lot more to tell, but we haven't got time for all that. But the story of his life and my relationship with my adopted father ends in Walton-on-Thames in the Cottage Hospital, which is now a car park and just off Sydney Road. But there's a hospital next to it now. But he was in the hospital there, and he only had, I would say, 12 hours to go before he died, and he was very ill. He could just about mutter words, and it was so sad to see this big, powerful, you know, James Bond character withered away on the bed like that. It really hurt me. I never forget his face. Today, I still see those eyes looking at me, sort of dead eyes. And he could hardly move his hand, and he reached for his old Dax jacket, which was hanging on the bed. And I could tell, because I knew him quite well by now, and I could tell he wanted something from his jacket. So I reached and got his diary. It was a slimline diary the gentleman always carried back then. And a piece of paper fell out of the diary and onto the bed. One of those NHS blankets, if you've ever been to hospital in England. I picked it up, and he went the other side, and he was sort of mumbling. And on the other side were, just 4 lines of letters and numbers. And I just said to him, "Is this what you want?" And the front side was a Home Office document about my birth and nationality. And he said, he kept pointing at these numbers and stuff. And I said, "What is this about?" And he said to me, these aren't the exact words, because it was 1993. So I haven't got the exact memory, but it was a conversation I had with him just before he died, where he wanted me to read this. And it was basically 4 lines of letters and numbers that I had no idea what they were. And I said, "What is this?" And he looked. I said, Is this anything to do with the money? Is this what you're talking about?" And he nodded, "Yeah." "So what is this?" And he said, "This is where we keep the money. This is where we hid the money." And then he started drifting off like that. And I just thought, well, let's leave it. I put the diary in my pocket, the paper in my pocket. And I stayed with him for a while. And then I went home, which was only up the road at the time. And because we'd moved back from the Costa del Sol. And about 4 a.m, I got a call to say he died. And it was, a really sad moment in my life. On the end of an era, old-fashioned, Bond Secret Service type characters. And it was a very, very sad moment. It hit me really hard. And, this was sort of January 1993. And he had a very good relationship with my wife. And unfortunately, my wife was also dying. She had a brain tumor. And she was bedridden. And she died later that same year. 1993 was a dreadful year for me. My wife died of cancer. My adopted father died that year of motor neuron disease. And then at the end of the year, I'll switch on the news. It was December early December, 6 or 2 or 6 something. I'll switch on the news as you do every night after dinner. And there's the announcer says that this guy, Pablo Escobar, has been shot dead on the roof of his house trying to escape the authorities. What a year. So I've lost my wife, my adopted father, the 2 people I loved most in the world. Obviously, I have my children, but and then the guy who's my real father has been killed as well. And my life just fell to pieces, basically. I got very depressed and turned to drink, which is I'm nothing to be proud of, to be honest. But that's basically, I think that answers the question.
Yes, no, it certainly does, Roberto. And that's a good thing. Talk about your mental health challenges and battles as well.
Yeah.
It's so important in society today. So you had all those things in your life that happened all in once, which is terrible. And you say you resorted to alcoholism and
after a big dinner, spaghetti bolognese, and then a double rum and coke turns into 6 double rum and cokes, and then you fall asleep. Well, that's how it starts, and then it drills down to get up in the morning. I've got to have a rum and coke, and eventually you drift into this world. It's not a conscious thing. You drift into this world where, if you're drunk, life is you're able more to cope with it. And that becomes a serious problem health-wise as well. But, you don't suddenly go, right, I'm going to be an alcoholic. You drift into it slowly, drags you in. It's like, the hand of death dragging you into the grave. It's a horrible thing. But I always find amusing things in these because, out of tragedy, you must find the funny side of it. Otherwise, you're going to get into problems. And I did end up on the ward for a couple of weeks in a mental health unit whilst they stabilized me, dried me out, and put me on some medication. And then I got out, and I was quite sort of stable character, then able to function again. My children stayed with their grandparents to start with whilst I was doing that. And I started to sort of level out a bit. And it took me like 2 years to come off the drugs, because you can't just come off the drugs quickly. And I eventually, got back on my feet. But I've always had sort of issues relating to the past. And you have to fight off depression all the time. You never quite get rid of it all. It's just something you fight off every day.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Oh, yeah. Millions of
Even
people
myself,
have
I can
trauma
relate
and
to
suffering. Yeah.
dealing with depression and being depressed all the time. It's not a great feeling, but there
No,
is
and
light
the
at the
other
end of the
thing,
tunnel.
I just wanted to interrupt you to say that depression isn't always, oh, I don't feel very well. It's not that. Depression can be, you could be like riding around feeling like you're on the moon, and you might be manic depressive. So if you get manic episodes where you're like overexcited and happy about something that's almost irrelevant, that's also part of depression. Recognizing that as well is important, because society out there, there's this kind of he's a nutter. There's that kind of stigma attached to mental health, which in fact is important that proper grown-up men, like me in my 60s now, we need to talk about it so that people don't view like if you're playing rugby and you break a leg, everyone goes, oh yeah, he's broken his leg playing rugby. Oh yeah. And it's accepted. So you've got a crutch and some plaster so people can see you've got an injury. But people can't see your injury if you've got the same injury, but in here. People can't see it. And so you're stigmatized a bit, like, there's something wrong with him, don't talk to him. And so that's not right. Of course, society shouldn't look at you like that. But the only way to do it is to educate people by just talking about it. You can't preach to people, you educate them. And look, everyone, you know as well as I do, that everyone loses someone they love, or more than one person they dearly love, to death. Death is one of those things we all have to accept. The older you get, the more people you love die before you. And the more that affects you, the feeling of loss and loneliness and all this. And what people do is they man up and they don't accept that there's a problem. Whereas in fact, yes, you do need to man up, but in a different way. You need to accept that that does affect you up here, and that you need to just remember that and talk about it to yourself and other people. And slowly you'll be able to cope with life, slowly and surely.
Yes, you got to have hope and optimism and be positive
Yeah.
and try, battle on and, with you.
But there are mechanics, the mechanicals.
Yeah.
It's no good just sitting there going, oh, I hope I win the lottery tomorrow and then I'll be all right. You can't do that. You got to be real. You got to keep yourself busy, get work, do something. I play the drums to get rid of the, if I get all stressed about something, I'll put my brush down and I'll go to the other side of the studio over there and put on a bit of Status Quo and get me sticks out, and I'm in Wembley. Right? And it's kind of gets rid of all that excess stuff that's in the body and the mind. And then after about an hour of that, I'm totally knackered anyway. So it's great. It's good exercise and good mental exercise. Exercising the brain is really important.
Your neighbors must like you, Roberto.
I don't have neighbors. I live in a forest.
Well, that's good.
But I've got neighbors quite a long way away, but they're not near enough to have a problem with.
Yes, yes. But you're also a painter as well. You're an artist and incredibly talented.
It's my proper job. Well, thank you very much. I'm a hyper-realist painter. I paint the scenes of life. I'm not one of these painters that I'm not surreal. I'm not an abstract artist at all. I just look at something and paint it, and hopefully people can see the beauty of God's creations in what I paint, and that's all I'm doing.
Is that something you always wanted to do, Roberto?
Oh yeah.
Is that what you wanted to do, be an artist? And were you sketching, drawing and painting as a kid?
Yeah, I remember disappointing my adopted father. We were living in the Caribbean at the time, and I was sat on a rocking chair. I was about 16 or something like that. I'd come home from boarding school. I was about to do my O-levels, and we had the father and son talk overlooking the Caribbean. You can imagine, it was lovely. And I still got the rocking chair, by the way. And he said to me, well, son, your education has cost a fortune. What have you learned from it? And I said, well, Dad, I learned to get around the rules without being caught. And he laughed and went, that's my boy, you know, that sort of thing. Then he said, so what do you want to do with your life, son? I said, well, I'm going to be an artist. And he sort of, his shoulders went down a bit. Oh, shit. But he always supported me. So, you know, and I became an artist. I went to art school, and all. Art school was a doddle. I didn't actually do a lot in art school, but but you know, I became a graphic artist at the time because that was the only way to make a living. And I ended up designing golf courses with famous golf course designers, and so I was able to earn a living. But I couldn't live in the UK doing golf courses, so we moved to the Costa del Sol in Spain. Hence the story I've just told you about going to Madrid to meet my adopted father.
Yeah. Obviously, it must be pretty good just to sit and paint and not think about anything else. And just what inspires you to, you know, put paint to canvas? Any particular things that inspire you?
Well, actually, it's the other way around. I do my thinking when I'm painting. So the act of painting withdraws my present mind from the world and the problems of the world, and I'm just painting. And I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing when I'm painting. I just look back and go, oh, I did that. So I don't worry about the technical aspects of painting anymore. I've learned all that, mastered the art of drawing and all these sort of things. So when I'm painting, I'm actually withdrawing from the world. It's therapy, and I'm painting, so I'm not in the world anymore. So now my mind is clear, and that's when I start thinking. So when I'm painting, I'm thinking good things and good thoughts, and it defragging, to use a modern phrase. It's basically a defrag. So when I'm painting, my mind is defragging. So I'm not worried about where the money's going to come from tomorrow. I'm not worried about this or that. That just all melts away. So when I'm painting, I'm actually healing my mind. I didn't appreciate that was the case, but that is apparently what's happening in my head. And that is why it's so important to do something like this. If you are vulnerable to addiction or alcoholism, whatever, you got to do something that helps take your mind away from those problems. So when I'm painting, my mind is thinking about now. When I'm painting, my mind is thinking about what I'm going to write in the next chapter of my latest book that I'm writing. That sort of thing.
Yeah, and you mentioned books and writing, and obviously using that as a form of therapy as well. Was that
very important?
Very important, obviously, but the process of remembering things and going back and looking back at your life, what was that process like to unpack things that you remembered a bit and then you discovered even more about that?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I didn't know that.
When I wrote this book, it was a different method to the other books I've written. This book was, fortunately, when I was a child, when I was adopted, my adopted family lived all over the world. So I had an aunt in Africa, somebody over here and somebody over there, an uncle in Canada. So what did they do? They all sent me the WhatsApps of the day, which was the postcards. So I'm a little child, and I received postcards from all these English people who are part of my adopted family. So now I kept them because I loved all the stamps, because the stamps are a history lesson all on their own. Yeah. I'm really interested in history. And so I kept the postcards with the stamps on them. Now, you know, in 19, when I'm researching my book, I've got a whole box full of postcards from my childhood, which tell me all about where I was, when I was, and who I was, because there's a stamp, there's a date stamp, and there's an address, so I know where I'm living. So I've got all that, and I also know who it's come from. So the research is, I'm able to anchor parts of my life, where I'm living, why, and how. So that was really useful. Also, we didn't have the kind of internet we have today. It's moved on really quick. There was the internet, but it wasn't as, you know, there wasn't the Google search bar that we have now, or whatever search bar you use. So there was other things. I had a huge box of family photographs, proper printed photographs. And fortunately, my adopted mother had written on the back, Philip in the Club Militar, because they called me Philip because that was my adopted name, in the Club Militar 1968, with Colonel whatever. So I have all these amazing photographs of people, and I turn them back and it says the year and who I was with. So I had all this research, so it helped me a lot. Plus, you put your memories in there, and I've got a big pile of papers of little notes that I've written of my memories. And add it all together, I've got a book. And then the book got sent to an editor so I wrote this book, it's like 70,000 words of linear life story. And then the original publisher, sent the manuscript that I gave them, which is a big fat printed document. I wrote every single word, and I've got the original manuscript with all my notes and stuff on it. And I gave that to the publisher, and they sent it off to an editor, who then did the English stuff with turned it into a book that's got proper English prose in it and dealing with all the mistakes of the spelling and all the other stuff. And it took quite a long time. They kept phoning me up. What does this mean? And the rest of it. But eventually, it got turned into the book that you can buy today. Then I got rid of the publisher, and because of the modern business of publishing, you can now publish your own stuff on Amazon. So I get a lot more royalties now than I did then. So financially, it makes sense to publish your own book nowadays. But anyway, the point is that's how the first book was written. It was a mixture of and old family movies that I've got on V8. So you put all that together. Fortunately, I've got everything I needed for the book plus my memories. But the next book I wrote, I've got the internet, and I've got a thing called Google search and all this sort of stuff. I don't know whether you use Google or whether you use something else, but we've all got now a thing called, it's not intelligent, but they call themselves artificial intelligence. There's a thing called this thing unit we're using today, which is we old people call it a telephone, but it's actually a handheld computer system. It's linked to the thing called the internet. And there's an interface between this phone and the data banks, which is an AI, which no one really knows what it is. It's some kind of entity. And I use that entity to research them. So I thought, right, okay, I'm going to carry on writing my books. So I'm writing my books. And the next book I wrote was a book that answered all the questions from the first book. And I call it The Silent Sacrifice, because the book is about my sacrifice in bringing up my children, and not what, all the mental health problems I went through and all the rest of it. But it's interesting because I've got the handheld unit, this phone, these things we call phones here, they're next to me. I'm painting in the studio and I'm talking to Gemini as if Gemini was a person, which it isn't. And I'm asking Gemini to research. So can you research De La Rue, Colombia, 1965, and when they started their operation? Then I get all this information, which now I can use as I'm writing the next book. So you get it? It's much easier. Now, I'm not getting Gemini to write for me because these things can't write, but, they can't write like humans because I'm writing memories of my own. But it's really good to have the research. So I can ask the AI to go into the archives of the British Library, if you like, and look up stuff that happened within the discovery of gold in Bogota in whatever it was. And I've got all those facts now. So I can now use AI to give me the facts and the research. And if you ask the question in 7 different ways, if the answer comes back the same, it's correct. So this is how I'm now getting the research done. So then I thought the world needs to know about cocaine, how it started, because it's related to my life. Not to glorify the product, in fact, the opposite, but how it all started. So then I thought, right, I'm going to write a new book. I wrote this epic book. I'm going to show it to you now. So it's called Snow and Ash. And this book is about the definitive history of the narcotic strain. So if you want to know how it all began from the beginning to right up to today, I wrote that book. And the research, I used AI to do the research from the British Library, the Gold Museum, and most of it. So I got those facts from there. So it's all very factual. But it is a linear story about people and indigenous cultures, which is quite interesting. I might do one about Australia one day because I'm very interested in indigenous culture and how indigenous people live alongside the Western world people in the same country. So I might look at that next.
Yeah, definitely. More projects, Roberto. More
Oh,
things
I
to
never
do.
stop. Mental health, if you stop, you'll go downhill. So you've got to keep doing stuff. Never stop.
Yeah, that's right. And you want to just research and discover new things and find
That's
out
it.
all the world has to offer. There's so many things that we haven't learned yet as humans, and you can learn so much.
Well, we're doing something incredible, which I don't think any of us absolutely understand completely. We're uploading onto databanks on this thing called the internet. We're uploading the whole sum of human knowledge. And there will come a time when the last bit of human knowledge is uploaded, and then we won't be required anymore. Let's hope something else changes it. But we are uploading the sum of all knowledge. I mean, let's say you have dinner, you sit down, let's watch a movie on Netflix, right? The thing comes up, all the words come up before, okay? And it always says, based on a book written by Fred Bloggs, or based on a novel written by so-and-so. So effectively, the story of human life is in books, and hundreds of millions of books. Now, most of those books, not saying all of them, but most of those books are now sitting in databanks. And so we have access to the knowledge of all human life through this entity using our interface units, which are these, mobile phones that we use. And so we have access to the sum of all human knowledge at the moment, to a point. And that's very interesting, because it's changing the way society works, which is something else that I have touched on in that book.
Yes, it's also about evolving, I suppose, as well. With what's happening in the 21st century, isn't it? You have to keep up with the new trends and technology.
Well, but it's quite interesting, because it's starting to tell me as such that the education system is actually slowly becoming irrelevant, which is quite interesting, because if you take that to an extent, why do we need schools if you can access the sum of all human knowledge through an interface unit called a mobile phone? So that whole question is actually beginning to become quite prominent and relevant in human society, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And, you can go down a rabbit hole.
I'll tell you something. I'll tell you something, just to move on. I'll tell you something. There's something that the human interface relationship between the data banks and the mobile phone systems cannot teach you to do. It cannot teach you to go out there and play cricket.
Exactly. Yes, exactly right, Roberto.
It can't. It might tell you what the rules are, and it might tell you what the rules are and what middle and leg means, and it might explain all the stuff, but it can't teach you how to go out there and stand in front of someone who's chucking a rock hard stone at you at 95 miles an hour. It can't teach you how to do that.
No, it can't. That's exactly right. But I just want to say, Roberto, thank you for sharing that with us. It was quite surreal to hear you speak about these things that have happened in your life.
Well,
you can never imagine that actually happening, but for you, it did. It happened. In life and dealing with these things, and when people hear about it, they're like, "Whoa, that's pretty." Pretty incredible.
I think that. I think what I'd like people to take from hearing me talk to you like this, the main take, I think, is that, oh well, he's been through a pile of crap. And so have I. So it is possible to get through it all and still be smiling and laughing about life. So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, definitely. It's like that Monty Python song.
Always look on the
bright side of life. In the life of Brian.
I do. Yeah, that's it. I always do look on the bright side. Or, if I'm at a funeral, I'll try and find something funny to look at. Because even at the worst, darkest days of people's lives, there's always something funny happening. If you look, you have to look for the amusing things, and then you'll find that you will be able to cope, even in the worst tragedies. But we've got to stay off the drugs. We've got to stay off the well, I don't know. I mean, people do whatever they want. I don't drink anymore because I can't deal with it. I just have to drink too much if I drink. stay off the narcotics, don't smoke, don't, you've got to deal with all these things. It takes time to get that into your head and start to try and sort of clean life up a bit. But it's very, very difficult, and it's very impossible to completely succeed, but you just have to keep trying and never give in.
That's right. Always keep fighting on and being resilient. I think that's the message from all of this. But thank you for sharing that with us, Roberto, your life journey and the challenges and what you've done and how you've dealing with this very traumatic upbringing in your life and coming on the other side of it and loving life and, happy to be here. So that's the important thing. Now, Roberto. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed hearing Roberto and I discuss Roberto's life journey.